standpoint, but we're really identifying it by an enormous cross-section of narratives that we've collected, and the assessment of all of these narratives, coding all of these narratives to say, no, that there is some regularity, and here's what the regularity is. Why is that important? I mean, on a side note, I'm not going to get into what motivates me personally, but it would be very good, I think, it's a bit paternalistic, but it would be very good for those individuals who don't recognize that they're processing information and stressors, what I would say negatively, and I am biased, I would bracket it, negatively, fleeing from something that they initially wanted to do and quitting or stopping, their intent shifted, the technical term is acrasia. Say, hey, don't you see, just to be aware that here's a stressor, but you could have processed that stress differently. And insofar as you could, I'm not telling you that you should, ethically biased, I'm not telling you that you should, but you could have processed that stressor differently, and here's some of the outcomes that you might have been able to achieve. Wow. And then leave it at that. Let the participant, let the other person make that recognition on their own, right? It is a sense in which the stressors exist as such, and it's the way in which I process these stressors that's important, right? And for those of you who are philosophers, a lot of people who watch these videos are philosophers, so you know about Immanuel Kant's sort of Copernican revolution. It's sort of buttressed in that, but what conflict resolution totally lacks is a theoretical account, and I'm not going to write it, but a theoretical account of this recognition, right? We need that because that's what conflict is. It is a perception of stressor and our relationship to that perception. The stressor is fixed. The perception is what changes. The way that you de-escalate or escalate conflict, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist entirely. Zartman's done a little bit on this. But even more theoretical, like really, really abstract theoretical conceptual analysis, I think is a need. Okay, I told you this 1.3 was going to be a bit out there as far as conceptual. I feel like I'm on another level right now. So that was the strategic approach. That should make sense. Alright, so that was a strategic approach. Number 3, oppositional relations. Okay, so we're talking about coping with conflict, and we have to learn to deal with conflict. We have to strategically approach our relationship as both participant and researcher-participant to conflict. And then the third is this oppositional relation. So let's look at what this might mean. So for example, what if one research group's empowerment is another disempowerment, especially where both are considered oppressed groups? So I'll give you an example. Rival gang members as the example. Think about this, right? If we are, as researchers, so I'll put it down first, oppositional. Now we're really going to get complex, right? Oppositional relation, R-E-L. So here I am as researcher. Here are my participants. Participant 1 and participant 2. And let's say I'm interviewing, not at the same time, same researcher, 2 different participants. And we recognize that there is an inverse relationship between participant 1 and participant 2. All right, so inverse, or, more sort of generally an oppositional relation. Excuse me. So there's an inverse relationship between participant 1 and participant 2. What does that mean? Those conditions, those stressors, those environmental factors in the external world that benefit participant 1 serve as a detriment to participant 2. So when presented with stressor environmental condition X, participant 1 flourishes, it benefits participant 1. When presented with exactly the same stressors, when presented with exactly the same environmental conditions, participant 2 is not able to flourish. There's an inverse relationship, right? So that's very, very heady. How do I make sense of that? The idea that I'm going to give, and this is just to make it simple, because I recognize how sort of conceptually abstract this 1.3 was, which is why I prefaced it, because it's a bit sort of conceptually difficult. If we have, let's say, gangbanger X, and gangbanger X is is selling drugs, and so is gangbanger Y. So two different participants, both gangbangers, both selling drugs. If you're selling drugs and I'm selling drugs, then the drugs that you sell is a detriment to me. Despite the fact that we're both selling the same thing, narcotics, when you sell it, it benefits you because you are able to procure money, you establish client relationships, you sort of corner a section of the geographic space of your community for the selling of drugs. All of that benefits you. That specifically serves as a detriment to me because I can't sell drugs there as well, right? So just visually, just to make this ridiculously obvious, right? Here's here's a cross section of the city, and participant 1 sell drugs here. Well, it's going to be impossible for me to sell drugs in the same sort of geographic location as participant 1 and 2 can't sell in the same area. So, you know, I might be over here. And as long as I establish this relationship, things can work. Right? So with respect to the nature of coping with conflict, the fact that we aren't competing in geographic space is going to minimize the conflict. If, however, participant 1 decides that he or she wants to sell narcotics, this is a horrible example, but it makes it super clear. Wants to sell narcotics in the same geographic location as I am, you recognize that there's going to be an escalation of conflict, right? There's an oppositional relationship between participant 1 and participant 2 and narcotics sale and geographic location, right? In order to minimize this conflict, you need to sell drugs in your own neighborhood. Okay, so super ghetto example, but whether it's ghetto or not isn't important. It's the fact that now you understand. You have to understand after that. Let me take it a level deeper, but let me read this first, right? So 3A on the top of page 8, the quote the proper course of action, that is what one should do, isn't a universal constant in this case. It's not a universal constant in this case, and I'll explain why. A researcher attuned to an ethics of care would take note of the source of this potential conflict in assessing data from respective participants. Now, we're going to take it a little bit deeper. We recognize that there's an oppositional or inverse relationship between the needs and benefits